Hi, everybody. Karen Roby here with Greg Nichols of ZDNet. We're talking about VR headsets. You can see them really anywhere these days, it seems, and many industries are using them now in different ways. But nuclear power plants is probably one of the places you wouldn't think of them being used very often, Greg, but it's actually the situation here. So talk a little bit about why nuclear power plants are starting to adopt virtual reality now.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, the simple answer is that simulations are just important training tools in any critical or high pressure job. Certainly, nuclear power plants qualify. And virtual reality is just a great tool for running simulations. I don't know if you're a fan of HBO's Chernobyl, but a big ingredient in the effectiveness of that drama was the minute by minute recreations of how the plant operators in the control room acted in the lead up to what obviously was a catastrophic failure. Definitely got my heart pumping. And that's because living through something, even in a fictional recreated environment like a TV show, is really profoundly powerful. And so for audiences of Hollywood dramas, obviously the effect is to engross or entertain. But for employees on the front lines of critical industries, simulations can really be these unparalleled teaching tools to help workers understand the challenges of doing their job under pressure. Things that they just couldn't learn appropriately or on an emotional level even by studying them in textbooks. So for that reason, as well as obviously to stave off future accidents like the Chernobyl disaster, nuclear power plants around the world spend millions annually to build physical simulators where power plant operators can kind of practice in a realistic environment and go through training exercises meant to simulate things like, small things like leaks, pipe leaks, or big things like damage from an earthquake or a fire. But there's problems with physical simulators. Primarily, they're very costly. They can also only be used by one group at a time, and they're actually in quite high demand in nuclear power plants. So virtual reality is really being held up by some as a solution. Instead of training in physical simulators, wouldn't it be nice if workers could run scenarios in virtual reality? That's kind of the question that's being asked now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you talked about how they're in high demand. So at this very point, as of today, are there any power plants actually using them right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. They are in a couple plants. So talk of this has been ongoing for years now. This isn't kind of a new concept. In fact, there's a 2013 paper I stumbled across in the journal. Let me see if I get this right. Emerging Technologies for Information Systems Computing and Management, which is not a journal that I would peruse lightly, but there was a 2013 article that describes a VR simulation that was actually built to help train workers to monitor things like codes, like the pressure, temperature, and flow and void, which are germane to nuclear power generation. So more recently, a plant run by Fortum, which is one of the largest power generation companies in the Nordic countries, is actually using virtual reality in what it is calling the world's first dedicated VR training room for control operators in one of its power plants in Finland. So we heard in doing this story from Joachim Bergroth, who's got a cool sounding role. He's a human factor engineering expert involved in the implementation of that virtual reality control room. And he says one advantage of the system is that it costs actually about a tenth of what a physical training room would cost to set up and develop. He also says that physical simulations are often fully booked. So not only with trainings where employees are training on various scenarios, but on equipment validation also, which is another use of these simulators. So in other words, before new equipment is installed in a power plant, it has to go through a validation process in a simulator to make sure it's safe. And for that reason, these training rooms, these physical training rooms, are in high demand, and often there's kind of not enough capacity to move quickly, to quickly get new equipment installed and validated. And that's a real problem when it comes to safety. So by moving from a physical simulator to a virtual reality simulator, Bergroth says that access can be expanded substantially, which means new equipment can be installed quicker and more people can be trained and put through that training more quickly.
Yeah, you can't argue with that. I mean, it makes perfect sense, and you cut down on the cost and everything there involved. So, the publication you were talking about, though, from 2013, that you wouldn't peruse lightly, and it doesn't sound like something I would either. So that that was a good bit ago. So why do you think it's taken so long for the power plants to start adopting, putting virtual reality in as part of their program?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The real, for all the potential advantages of VR, the specific use case of training nuclear plant operators has been impractical to date. And the primary issue is resolution. In real nuclear control rooms, there are usually like hundreds of panels. Going back to Chernobyl, if you saw that show, there were dials and panels and information kind of being spat at you from everywhere around that room. And that detailed information on pipes and on gauges has to be read very clearly and very quickly. And it's definitely a big part of an operator's training protocol to understand how to read those things at a glance and understand the implications. And it's just simply put difficult to do that if the resolution of a virtual reality headset isn't up to snuff. If you can't clearly see what the dial says. Bergroth mentioned that in previous attempts to do this, to bring in VR headsets in nuclear power plant simulations, trainees would often have to lean way forward toward the dials to get closer than they would in a real life scenario. And because the situational fidelity is really key to any simulation environment, that just wasn't good enough. So, in the same vein, control room operators, they often have to look through physical manuals. A lot of them are kept in hard copy, just in case there's some kind of a catastrophic power outage, they can still read what to do. And, the type in a 12-point font or a 10-point font or even smaller is just hard to read in most virtual reality environments. So that's been the big constraint.
And with like the resolution issues and things like that, what is now changed to where it's making it more possible that they'll be adopting VR?
Yeah, there have been more and more headsets that have come out recently that are specifically targeting the enterprise, and those are kind of different from the off-the-shelf headsets that you might find for gaming, in that they are paying close attention to fidelity. In order to do just this, accurately represent the physical world. So slowly but surely, the resolution challenge is being surmounted. A company called Varjo, Varjo, makes a headset called the VR1, and it's pretty extraordinary. Our colleague, actually, Tiernan Ray, just visited Varjo's headquarters in Helsinki and did a great write-up on the company. And Bergroth, who I spoke with, says simply that with the VR1, his people can explore virtual environments in really the same way they would explore a physical environment. So a threshold has kind of clearly been reached here, and experts are now starting to deem headsets capable of training some of the most critical frontline infrastructure personnel on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have seen Chernobyl. It really is. It's fascinating.
Absolutely, yeah, and harrowing for sure.
Most definitely. All right. Well, this is really cool stuff here. We appreciate it, Greg. I know your full article can be found there on ZDNet, so make sure you check it out. Thanks for watching.